I awoke to a surprise text from my boss one morning that said I didn't have to work that day. I was really happy because that meant I could do whatever I wanted. The kids were at school and my wife was at work, so I had the whole entire day to myself. I also get paid salary, so I wasn't necessarily losing out on any money either. It was paid time off, let me just put it that way. I woke up and I did my usual routine, which was shower and eat breakfast. I took my time and I went about everything a bit slower than usual because usually in the morning I'm always in a rush, so it was really nice to catch a break for once. I sat down and turned the TV on with a smile on my face, just trying to figure out how I wanted to spend my day. Don't get me wrong, I love sitting at home just as much as the next guy, but I also like to get out. I get bored pretty easily and I can only watch so much TV. I decided I was going to go hiking at a nearby trail that I had discovered from a quick search on Google. I thought about taking Charlie, my dog, with me, but I decided against it because from the looks of it, it was a pretty long and pretty hard hike, and I was relatively new to hiking, so that's why I chose to go by myself. I didn't want to tire Charlie out. It was about a half an hour of a drive, and on my way there, I texted my wife to let her know what I was doing. I brought everything I needed for the day. Although I wasn't expecting to be gone for more than 3 hours, I packed a little extra of everything, just in case. I wouldn't say this was out of character for me, but it definitely wasn't something I did often. I've been trying to get my wife to come hiking with me for months now, but we have just been so busy that it's been tough. I've always been an outdoorsy person, so I was extremely excited. When I arrived, I parked my car and got out. I grabbed my backpack and off I was. Right away, I noticed how there weren't many people at all, which I assumed wasn't unusual given that it was a Tuesday at 8:45 in the morning. Before I entered the trail, I saw a wooden post with a map on it that surveyed the entire area. I wasn't exactly sure how long this hike was going to take me, but I had a pretty good idea for believing it was a decently large trail in size. The way that I took was a 4.5 mile long hike. The entire scenery was just absolutely gorgeous. It was such a beautiful day. There was a light breeze and the perfect amount of sun was poking through the trees on my back, and it was exactly what I needed. I was having the time of my life and really appreciating nature. About 20 minutes into my adventure, I put my headphones in, but after a few songs played, my music suddenly stopped. I took my phone out to turn the music back on, and I noticed that my cell phone only had 1 bar of service. Within seconds of that, as I was putting my phone back in my pocket, a deer jumped out right behind me and sprinted across the trail very quickly and ran through the woods and disappeared in a matter of seconds. It spooked me so much that I literally jumped and my heart started racing. I let out a quick chuckle when I realized it was only a deer, and I sighed in relief. But then I looked to the right of me. That's when I saw someone sitting on the ground with their legs crossed, staring right at me. They had a creepy mask on, and it looked like they had something in their lap, like maybe a weapon. From where I was standing, I thought it looked like an axe. "Hello?" I said. "What are you doing?" The person then stood up, and right away I thought it was a man, because of how tall he was, and he looked pretty muscly. He started walking towards me while patting his hand with the axe. He didn't say a word. I started walking the way I came from, and I even left my backpack on the ground. I was just trying to get out of there as quickly as possible, and the last thing on my mind was my backpack. He picked up his speed a bit and started jogging towards me. That was when I started a full-on sprint, and he did the same. I ran track for 4 years in high school, so luckily I was prepared for a foot race. He then threw the axe at me because he probably realized I was much faster than him. He hit me directly in my left ankle, and it hurt like hell, and it made me trip and fall to the ground. I yelled in pain, but I managed to get up. Fortunately for me, I think it was the butt or the shoulder of the axe that hit my ankle head on, rather than the blade. He was catching up to me now though, but I managed to grab the axe before he could get to me. I ran the fastest I could with my injured ankle. He was a very tall man. See, I'm 6'2", and this guy was probably like 4 inches taller than me. I was just praying to God that I could find the strength in me to escape and get home safely. All I could think about was my wife and kids. The only chance I had at surviving was running or beating him to death with the axe, and that was the last thing I wanted to do. He very well could have overpowered me though if it had gone to that level. I just kept running and I chose not to look back. I just ran as fast as I could. I still had a long ways back to the car and I was determined to make it, although I wasn't too sure about my chances. I certainly gave that guy a run for his money though. I looked behind me, finally after a few minutes of running, and I saw he was no longer behind me. That didn't stop me from running though. I dropped the axe as it was honestly just slowing me down, and I ran all the way to my car while taking a few quick stops for a quick breath. I finally made it back to my car, but I still wasn't getting any service, and there was no one in sight that could help me. As I was pulling out of the park, the masked man was standing right by one of the stop signs near the exit. He stood there and stared at me. I felt his eyes piercing through me, even though I tried to pay no mind to him. I called the police and made a report, but that guy is out there somewhere, still lurking in the shadows, looking for his next victim, because they never managed to find him. I haven't been out hiking ever since. My family and I went camping one year in a small campground in the middle of the woods. My parents let me bring one friend with me to tag along. I was sort of excited to go, but I also kind of wanted to stay home for the weekend and play my video game that I got for my birthday a few weeks prior. Anyways, the night before we left, my dad said I could bring a friend, but only one. That made me a lot happier about going, and I called up my best friend right away. It took some convincing, but he finally caved in and said that he would come and that he just had to check with his mom first. He called me about an hour later when he got the okay from his mom that he could come with us. Leo, my best friend, and I stayed up late all night playing Halo and talking about what we were going to do when we went camping this weekend. I told him it wasn't like your average campgrounds in America that had parks and a pool with motorhomes and fifth wheels everywhere. It was legit in the middle of nowhere. There were a few RVs, but most of the campers there had tents. Leo was concerned that it wasn't going to be much fun, but I reassured him of all the things that we could do, and I told him that we could bring our bikes to go on bike rides in the trails, and that we could go fishing at the nearby lake and tons of other stuff, like sit by the fire and make s'mores. I mean, the list was endless. Our first night there, we did just that. We even set up a badminton net and the whole family played. The days were going by quick, and we were having tons of fun. It was now Saturday night, and my family and I were getting ready for bed. Leo and I weren't tired though, and we had no plans of going to sleep anytime soon. Leo and I had our own tent, so it was cool, because we had like our own space, away from the adults. I told Leo that we should go explore the woods and try to find trails that we hadn't been through yet. He was down for the adventure, so we both grabbed flashlights and waited until we were sure that everyone else was asleep. We snuck out of our tent quietly and we started walking. We waited to turn the flashlights on until we were at least a good 10 feet or so away from camp, as we were just being cautious to not wake anyone up. Leo came up with the idea that we should walk through the woods with our flashlights off for as long as we could. I didn't really want to do that, but I didn't want to seem like a wuss in front of my friends, so I agreed. We walked for maybe 3 or 4 minutes with practically no idea where we were headed. It was so dark that Leo and I could barely even see each other. "Shh," I said. "You hear that, Leo?" "What?" "Shh," I whispered again ever so softly. I turned my flashlight on, and so did Leo. "You heard that, right?" I asked. "Yeah, what the heck was that?" Leo said. "I'm not sure. It legit sounded like somebody was whispering though, and it scared the crap out of us." As soon as we turned the flashlight back on, the whispering stopped. We continued walking with our flashlights on for a minute or two, and we decided it was time to turn our flashlights back off. Less than a minute after we turned the flashlights off while walking, we heard the whispering again, just barely though, as the crunching of the sticks and leaves beneath our feet were almost masking the sound completely. We couldn't make out what was being said, but it sounded like a bunch of gibberish. We turned our flashlights on again immediately, and we were determined to find where the noise was coming from. We looked around for a moment, and that was when Leo screamed my name. I looked over at him, and he was stunned, like a deer locked onto headlights of a car, staring at something. I rushed over to him to see what he was talking about. There was an older woman that looked like she hadn't slept in days or showered for weeks, that was lying on the ground half naked. I looked at her in utter disbelief as I could not believe my eyes. Then she got up and apologized, and before she walked away, she said that she was sorry again, and that she was just looking for her campsite. Then she took off running in the opposite direction. Right after that, Leo and I ran back to our tent, as we had enough for the night. We talked about what happened in our sleeping bags until we were finally able to fall asleep. The creepiest thing about this whole situation, though, was we were the only campers nearby for a good half mile. That was by far the strangest thing that has ever happened to me. My dad took me on a trip in the vast wilderness of Ontario, Canada, near the mountains. As we were exploring, we came across a giant cave. My dad noticed a blood trail leading into the cave, and he wanted to investigate. My dad had a shotgun, and I had a rifle, so we figured we were safe enough. As we made our way into the cave, we followed the trail of blood until it led us to a decapitated grizzly bear. Someone or something had completely severed the bear's head off of its body and left with the head when they walked out of the cave, hence the blood trail. It must have been like a trophy to whoever did that or something. We walked a bit further into the cave, and that's when we found something even more disturbing and absolutely heart-wrenching. There was a man that looked like he had been mauled by a bear. His insides were spilling out of his stomach, and it was the most gruesome thing I've ever seen. I think the old man reminded my dad of his father, because the man looked extremely similar to him, and his dad had been shot and killed a few years back in a hunting accident, so it really hit home for him. My dad started crying and having a complete breakdown. At first we were terrified, especially me. The man's dead body looked like it had been sitting there for days, as his face and body was starting to decay and change color. We were completely bewildered and we didn't know what to do. My dad said we weren't going to call the police because we had touched the evidence and it was a murder scene, which would mean that we could potentially be a part of the investigation should there be one. And even calling the police, we would immediately be drawn out as potential suspects, even though we had nothing to hide necessarily. Ultimately though, the decision was up to my dad, so I left it at that. We later found out about a week later when it was broadcasted on the news that the person who severed the bear's head did so because the bear killed his friend. And the man apparently attempted to save his friend by shooting the bear, but he was too late. It was said that the man severed the bear's head out of anger. The thing we couldn't seem to understand was how come he didn't call the police after his friend had been mauled to death. The whole entire story is just horrific though, nonetheless, and very strange and eerie to think about. It makes you wonder if there is anything else to the story. I personally believe that the man killed his friend, or that someone else may have killed him, and then the bear ate him while he was dead. That's really the only thing that makes any sense to me. The man who murdered the bear is completely unknown, by the way, and they have nothing on him. This was all just speculation, and that was just a story that we heard. No one ever came out and admitted anything, and the police don't even have a potential suspect either. It's definitely a mystery if you ask me.